Hello and welcome to the 191st edition of the Illegal Motion College Football Podcast. In Nashville, Tennessee, I'm the professor, Matt Perkins. And a corner post across the Harpeth River from me here in the Music City, it's our own offensive coordinator, the coach, Corey Burton.
Correction, the 2-0 offensive coordinator, Corey Burton. And I love the double move. That was kind of like your subtle way of saying that we're 2-0. So very nice to be here. It was a great opening weekend of college football. I mean, were the games all that exciting? I don't know. We'll find out. But it's good to have this problem, and it's good to be back on the show with all of you. So happy to be here, and let's get rolling.
Well, we can't get rolling without the third amigo in the second city. A man who just took a DNA test. Turns out he's 100% that dude. It's our intrepid blogger from Big Ten and Counting, Josh Cook.
I'm told it's a reference of some kind, and I have no idea as to what.
Thank you for not participating in pop culture, Josh. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Week one in the books. We are here to break it down. Big games, upsets, big plays, and questionable coaching decisions.
Speaking of breaking, Smokey the dog has entered the transfer portal.
I think one of the greatest harbingers of the Tennessee game was that one of the boats in the Vol Navy burned into the sea or burned into the lake or the river or wherever it is that they dock their boats before the game up near Neyland Stadium on Saturday before the game even started. And we will be talking about that lovely, lovely win by Georgia State over Tennessee a little bit later in the show. But we're going to get started first with a quick recap of our picks from spread formations last week. We started off all right. All of us were on the winning side of a couple of the games. Wisconsin was a 12-point favorite over South Florida down in Tampa. Coach and I had the Badgers minus 12. Josh had the under of 59.5. We all win. Wisconsin won 49-0, easily covering the 12 points. And by not allowing USF to score, they easily hit the under. Florida International was at Tulane. Tulane was a 2.5-point favorite with an over/under at 58. I chose the over. I was just off on that. It was a total of 56. Josh, you were correct. Tulane blew out FIU 42-14. Coach, going with FIU in that one was not the best choice. Boston College was a 4.5-point dog at home to Virginia Tech with a 58.5-point over/under. Josh and Coach both had Boston College. I had the under, and we all won on that case. Ole Miss and Memphis played, and Memphis was a 5.5-point favorite at home with an over/under of 67.5. Josh, you and Corey both took the over. They combined for 25 points, coming up 42.5 points short of that 67.5-point over/under. I chose Memphis. I chose Memphis to cover, and they did by half a point. I get the victory there.
If memory serves, there was some inclement weather involving Ole Miss not bringing their offense.
Well, that Vegas doesn't care about that. They care about the money. Finally, UMass and Rutgers squared off in East Piscataway. Rutgers was a 15.5-point favorite at home. All three of us, gentlemen, took the under, and amazingly, these two teams combined to score 71 points, so we all lost. Anyway,
we all won by not watching it.
That is also correct. Josh, you and I both went 3-2 on the week. Coach went 2-3. With that, let's hit our quick slants. Josh, I'm going to throw it off to you first to talk about a little bit around the Big Ten.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the Big Ten later in the show, but I just had three quick impressions that are kind of minor details that wouldn't be brought up in our larger conversation. The first is Michigan State meet the offense, same as the old offense. A pretty brutal day against Tulsa. Brian Lewerke, a 46.6 QBR, not particularly impressive. 300 total yards against Tulsa.
And Tulsa is not exactly great shakes when it comes to defense.
Yeah, they scored 3 points in the second half. So trouble signs already. Michigan State needs to do a lot to turn things around.
Yeah, just real quick, 3 of Michigan State's 4 touchdowns were non-offensive.
Yeah, that's an issue. Second one, Northwestern's quarterback issues. Worse than I expected. I sort of assumed that replacing Clayton Thorson was going to be hard. Hot shot recruit, Hunter Johnson. There's sometimes some red flags about 5-star kids. One is if they can't win a starting job and then transfer. And then another red flag is if they don't develop anything. There's opening impressions. You can sort of tell if a quarterback has it. For instance, Boise State, we'll talk about that game a little bit. They had a quarterback with a pretty good opening impression. Hunter Johnson, 6 of 17, 55 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and had the fumble that sealed the game for Stanford.
Is that bad?
He got benched for TJ Green, who played a little bit better. But Green has hurt his foot, and he's out a really long time, potentially the entire season, if he needs surgery. So Northwestern quarterback situation, not too soon to panic there. It was pretty bad. And my last opening impression for the Big Ten is it's Akron, but 42 points, and Illinois looking somewhat competent this year. We'll see if that lasts, but Illinois certainly surprised me by blowing out a team to the degree that they did.
Yeah, Illinois was definitely one of the bigger surprises, just in terms of the fact that they looked just competent for the first time since Lovie Smith started coaching there. Another team that looked more
I honestly think it's the first time they looked competent since Rod Zook was there.
Well, yeah, since Juice Williams was their quarterback.
Yeah.
Coach, you and I were at the Georgia Vanderbilt game on Saturday. We even got to hang out for a minute when I was not surrounded by dogs. I mean, if you went to the game, you would think that you were actually at a Georgia home game, except for the fact the stadium is about 1/10 the size of Sanford Stadium. Coach, what were some of your impressions about the dogs and Vanderbilt this weekend?
Well, observations. Almost first start off with the little nugget you said about the attendance. It didn't really resonate on TV as much as it did when you're actually there in person and you saw that Georgia had about 90% of the stadium, would be a fair assessment. And it was like the home team actually had to use silent count because it was so loud. That's crazy. Okay, that's observation number 1. Observation number 2, Georgia's offensive line is enormous. And the starting right tackle is about 6'8", 360 so pounds.
Isaiah Wilson.
And it doesn't get much smaller from there. And it goes across the board. So I thought that was impressive just to see how massive those guys were. Another observation, Keyshawn Vaughn, he's a bona fide NFL running back, hands down. Observation number 3, Vandy is good at open field tackling. There wasn't a whole lot of catch and runs for a whole bunch of yardage. They did a tremendous job of limiting the damage in Georgia's passing game. I think Jake Fromm did a tremendous job of finding his down low check down routes and getting the ball out quick. Vandy just did a great job open field tackling. So it was solid, effective, efficient pass game from Georgia. Vandy just made it look a lot worse because they're probably, I would venture to say, one of the better tackling teams in the country as far as open field tackling goes. Observation number 4?
Sure, why not?
Yeah, Georgia fans are spoiled, man. They are so spoiled, and I have no problem admitting that. Even my college buddies who I went to the game with are absolutely spoiled because, when you can complain about running the ball at 9-10 yards a clip and just mauling Vandy's defensive front, which was inexperienced but talented. They have some talented guys, but relatively inexperienced. But they were road grading Vandy, especially early on. And Georgia fans are up there complaining that we're not slinging the ball around the yard. Jake Fromm didn't come out of there with 450 yards passing and 6 touchdowns and no interceptions. I mean, what do you want? I mean, 30-6 road conference divisional win, and
On
Vandy
opening
was
weekend.
on opening weekend, and Vandy was never ever in the game. They put together a couple nice drives, but they were never in the game.
It was
because
21-0 in the blink of an eye. It was 3 series for Georgia, 3
yeah,
touchdowns, and it was never close.
and Jake Fromm dropped a dime on the back pylon for the first touchdown. So
It was a beautiful
what?
throw.
I mean, I read the feedback on the message boards. I hear the people around me talking about it. I mean, that was about as most demoralizing of that's the most demoralizing thing you can do to another team is just cram the ball down their throat and offer absolutely make them think there's absolutely nothing they can do about it. So that part made me scratch my head a little bit. And then my final observation, I don't even know where I was going to go with that. Based on my final observation, Georgia's defense is living up to its billing, especially with Azeez Ojulari. That guy is the real deal. And I wish Richard LeCount would stop getting face mask penalties. He's really good at that. So,
Yeah, he got a couple of those.
So those are my observations. The pass game will be fine. We hit Georgia. I say we, but Georgia hit a long touchdown that was called back to Demetrius Robertson. They fumbled inside the 5 on another long pass play. Their passing game will be fine, guys. It really will be. George Pickens is super talented. He's going to be the jump ball guy that Fromm likes to go to. D-Rob is going to be the jet sweep underneath, take the lid off the top guy, and they're going to have everything in between. So it'll be fine. DeAndre Swift is good. Zeus is really good. Just needs to hold on the ball a little bit better, but he's the real deal. Brian Herrion's a tough runner. I mean, they got 2 good tight ends in Charlie Warner, and Eli Wolf actually, graduate transfer, did a hell of a job coming in and playing in some spots. And so they're going to be fine. Passing game's going to be fine. It's going to be there when we need it. Don't worry. D-Rob is everything that we want him to be. That's Demetrius Robertson for those keeping score at home. So those are my observations. Those are my main observations.
Yeah, Coach, I'm just going to I'm going to piggyback off of you there really quickly because Vanderbilt is going to be better than advertised. That team is extraordinarily well coached. That defense is, the fact that they gave up 21 really quick and then gave up 9 points for the rest of the game, that tells me something. And the fact that they weren't blown out when they easily could have just hung their heads and had Georgia put up 100 on them. And they stayed in it. And, Coach, you and I had a little cookout last night, and we got to talking. You said that, there's potential for Vanderbilt to be second, third best team in the SEC East this year. And considering the performances of some of the teams that we're going to talk about later, that is not too much of a stretch.
No, I mean, I think the winner of the Florida Vanderbilt game may likely determine number 2 in the East. I think Riley Neal's a good quarterback. I think he's going to end up being better than Pat Shurmur because he offers more. He's more of a threat in multiple areas.
One of the things that I noticed about Neal was that he seemed to make his reads much faster than Shurmur did. He seemed to go through his progressions way faster. I felt like Shurmur last year just would stare down a receiver every single time and not move to a second, third option in his progression. And Neal would find his first guy. They weren't open and go for the second guy. They're not open. Okay, tuck the ball and run. And I think that bodes really well for this Commodore team. They're going bowling again this year.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
They're definitely going bowling again this year. And considering the state of some of these other teams in the SEC East, they could be up for a mid to upper tier bowl game. So
they really could be.
Well, let's go from 2 teams that has a lot of positive takeaways from the first weekend to 2 teams that are going to have a lot of negative takeaways. I'm going to talk about the sad state of football in my former hometown, Los Angeles, California. It's a sad day in the city of Angels. Let's start by going back to Thursday night. My UCLA Bruins laid an absolute stinker in the Queen City, losing to the Cincinnati Bearcats 24-14. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who was referred to as DTR by the broadcast about 50 trillion too many times, could not hold onto the ball to save his life. He accounted for 4 turnovers, 2 of which were in the red zone. And these were some of the ugliest plays I've seen in a very long time. One time he went back to throw the ball and literally just dropped it. It was really bad. The only saving grace for this entire game was the fact that Pat McAfee was on the call, and he was a breath of fresh air. Besides that, it was just brutal to watch this game. The year 2 of the Chip Kelly experiment is not off to a good start in Westwood. Some of the Bruin faithful are already calling for his job. I would pump the brakes on that just a little bit. They were playing without probably their best offensive player in Joshua Kelly, the star tailback. He was out for the week. He'll be back next week, and hopefully the Bruins will be able to get things in gear and get going. We know that Luke Fickell is always going to bring a strong defense, and the fact that the game was in Cincinnati did not help the Bruins, but still, you expect better than 14 points against an AAC team if you are UCLA. They also get San Diego State next week, which
We're probably distracted by the sound. I mean, Nippert Stadium probably has about twice as many fans than what normally
as the Rose Bowl. Maybe, but they get to play San Diego State next week. San Diego State barely beat Weber State of FCS fame last week 6-0. So who knows? But year 2 is not off to a good start for Chip Kelly and crew in Westwood. Across town, USC managed to do a little better, at least on the scoreboard. They beat Fresno State 31-23 at the Coliseum, but man, it did not look pretty in the process. The Trojans almost conceded the potential game-tying touchdown late in the 4th quarter, but Isaiah Polomau picked off the Jorge Urania pass in the end zone to end the threat. But what is of bigger concerns to the denizens of South Central Los Angeles is the fact that JT Daniels, their sophomore quarterback, tore his ACL during the game and is going to be out for the year. He was replaced by Keaton Slovis, a true freshman out of Scottsdale, Arizona, who was not great. I mean, he completed 6 of 8 passes, but not for a ton of yardage, had an interception thrown in there. And it's going to be interesting to see who lines up behind center for the Trojans going forward. We already thought this was not, going to be a good year for Clay Helton. His job may be on the line. And if JT Daniels is out, they've lost, the key cog in that entire offense. So expect to see even more Stephen Carr and company coming out of the backfield. But they've got Stanford next week, and then they've got a pretty rough schedule, at least especially in the first half of the season. They've got Utah at home. They've got Utah at home, plus road games against Oregon and Washington. This is not going to be pretty for the Trojans. And so with that, let's head over next to our pop quiz before we hit the deep root. So take out your number 2 pencils, bust out your Scantron sheets. It is time for that favorite segment of everyone. Gentlemen, this weekend, there were 19 teams that accrued more than 550 yards of total offense in week 1. Your job is to name those 19 teams, and Coach, I'm going to start with you.
Ooh. I'm going to go with the Sooners as one of those teams.
Oklahoma, that is correct. They had 686 yards in their route of Houston. Josh.
Well, I didn't watch much of the game because it was Howard, but pretty tough to score 79 points if you're not moving the ball. So I'll go with Maryland.
Maryland, 623 yards. That is correct. Coach.
I'm going to go on the same token. It's kind of hard to score 55 without putting up a ton of yards. So I'm going to go with LSU.
LSU. Sorry, Coach. That is incorrect. That is Incorrect. LSU only had 472 yards.
Oh, only.
Only.
I believe it happened for the third time in the AP poll era, but the Big Ten had 2 teams hit 70 points on the same day. So I'll go with Penn State.
Yep, Penn State 673 yards in their 79-point outing.
Well, we know it wasn't Ole Miss. To strike them from the list. We
also know it wasn't Tulsa because they had negative 73 rushing yards.
Oh my God, that's embarrassing, dude. We because I want to laugh at Tennessee again. We know it wasn't Tennessee. Let's see. Jeez, I don't even know.
I'm gonna need an answer,
Clemson.
Coach. Clemson, yeah, that's correct. 632 yards against the Ramblin' Wreck.
I'm blanking on who they played, but I saw Central Florida put up like 60 spot on Sunday.
That was FAMU.
Yeah. Central Florida, 694 total yards against FAMU.
That's a day.
Yep. Coach.
We'll go
By the way, Coach already mentioned Oklahoma, or someone mentioned Oklahoma already. I just want to note, Oklahoma averaged 11.25 yards per play.
Defense.
That vaunted Houston Cougar defense.
Houston.
I know we mentioned Penn State already, but my God. That's just crazy looking at that score. I'm going to say the Cougs.
Always a good bet.
Which ones?
Wazoo.
Wazoo is 618 yards. Correct.
Who's the other Cougs?
I'm sure there are other Cougars somewhere. I just can't remember off the top.
We usually call them BYU.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
BYU did not put up that many yards against.
No, that was not a guess.
I know.
Let's see. Well, it stuns me to say it, but being a Big Ten blogger, I did occasionally peek into Rutgers and obviously looking at the week for recap stuff. I know Rutgers hit over 500 yards against Massachusetts. I can't believe I'm saying them in a pop quiz.
Yep, 554. It's correct. Ooh. They are the 19th out of 19 teams to go over 550 for the week.
Temple's got to be one of those teams.
Temple is number 1, 695 yards.
Nice. We are getting closer and closer to the end of my list, which is a little concerning. But I believe in that insane back and forth shootout back in week 0. Does that count, Matt?
Yes, it does.
And I will go with Hawaii.
Hawaii had 595 yards. That is correct.
There we go.
Against Arizona.
I'm going to have to say Oregon State. I was going to say Oregon State. Oklahoma State.
Oklahoma State had 555 yards. That is correct, Coach.
They gave up 36 to the Beavs, by the way. Just so you know. Just in case you're wondering.
This is the last one that I'm confident on because I watched the game wire to wire, but that would be the Boise State Broncos.
The Bronx. That is correct. 621 yards against the Seminoles of Florida State.
I didn't realize they racked up that many yards, but dang.
621 yards, only 3 offensive touchdowns.
Yeah,
That's
they
hard to do.
Yeah, they had a ton of drives result in field goals.
I
mean, didn't they have 5 field goals in the game, something like that?
Yeah.
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 So. What about the Bears of Waco?
Baylor. Sorry, Coach. Baylor only put up 518 yards. That is your second strike.
Ooh.
Only.
All right. Well, now I'm kind of scraping some teams I'm not as sure about. I know they only put up 49 points, but it seemed like it was so methodic. I'm going to take a stab in the dark with Wisconsin.
Oh, Wisconsin. Sorry, Josh. Wisconsin is not in the top 50 for the week, actually.
Oh, okay.
Wisconsin's total for the week was 433 yards. That is your first strike.
Oh, okay.
What about here's one off the wall as I look at the scoreboards, just looking for big numbers. What about UNLV over Southern Utah?
The University of Nevada at Las Vegas is incorrect. 534 yards, just short. That is your third strike. Josh for the win.
Ooh, boy. Let's see. Using coach's strategy, a team that put up a pretty big number, Jake from Georgia. That kind of worked.
No.
Didn't Washington have a ton of points against some scrub?
Washington is correct. 570.
Well, sorry, Eastern Washington's not a scrub.
570 yards for Washington gives you the win.
Whoa.
Well done, Josh. The teams you guys missed, Texas Tech. How are you gonna talk about offense without talking about Texas Tech? 600.
Because Kingsbury's in Arizona now.
Yeah,
Who cares?
I didn't even see their score. Who'd they play?
Does it matter?
Yeah, because it's Texas Tech. They're erratic. Who'd they play?
I assume they played. I assume they played like Houston Baptist or Incarnate Word or something.
First of all, they played Montana State. Second of all, the score was only 45-10.
Yeah. Well, somehow, they 45-10, but still 691 total yards. Other teams you guys missed, Bowling Green. 600. Bowling Green and Marshall both put up 620 yards. Utah State 596 yards in their loss to Wake Forest, who also put up 579 yards in that one. Josh, your newly adopted team, North Texas, picked up 575 yards, and finally, Kansas State 573 yards in Chris Kleiman's first game at the helm of the Wildcats.
That's not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all. Well, gents, let's hit some deep roots, and we're just going to go conference by conference here because there weren't really any marquee games except for Auburn, Oregon. So I guess we got to start there. Josh, you and I were texting throughout the second half of this game because I left the Georgia Vanderbilt game early to come home and watch this one because it was much more competitive than the game that was going on in front of me.
You left Coach high and dry.
Yeah, well, we were our seats were not together. We were two sections apart.
You were his ride to the stadium.
No. Thank goodness I was not his ride to the stadium.
Yeah, that sucked.
But Josh, Bo Nix, the legend of Bo Nix begins for Auburn. Come back to win 27-21. But Josh, there was some seriously questionable coaching going on here.
Yeah, these are two teams that I can officially write off of winning a conference title. They're not well coached. Disappointed in Cristobal. I thought he played some very conservative, try not to lose down the stretch play calling. Why does Hebert only have 37 passing attempts to 33 rushing attempts when you have 90 yards out of those 33 rushing attempts? I would have taken about 5 to maybe even 10 of those runs and given them to Hebert. Let your Heisman Trophy potential, although that's probably out the window now, quarterback, let it spin. And then the biggest coaching decision of all, a miracle they won. Quite frankly, this was just awful. This is why Gus Malzahn is so, mixed, I guess is the nice, polite way to say it for the Auburn fan base. So they score a touchdown to make it 19-21, and he picks the point after. Why don't you go for 2 to try and tie the game? And then at the end of the game, when they did score, he kicks again to go up 27-21 instead of 28-21. So he forced himself to score more points by not potentially tying it. And then a 6-point lead and a 5-point lead are essentially the same. because the odds of, we'll give up the touchdown and then he'll miss the point after is pretty low. Go for 2, make it a 7-point game. And with that funky kick return, setting them up at the 35-yard line, there's a very real chance that Oregon could have had a pretty manageable Hail Mary, all things considered, and won this game 28-27 until one of the worst throws I've ever seen in the final play.
It went 15 yards out of the end zone.
I did like what I said to you. I don't know if you showed this text to Coach, but right after that pass, Coach, I texted Matt and I said, based on his arm strength and accuracy, this is the next quarterback for the Buffalo Bills.
And he would be correct.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I did watch a portion of the replay of this game.
Yeah, with me.
With Matt. And a couple observations there. I thought Auburn recovered extremely well from what could have been a game that got away from them, because what I said in the preview is that if Oregon can turn this thing into a track meet and keep it there, they would run away with it. And it looked like they were going to for a little while because they turned it. That's kind of how the game started. Justin Hebert, I love that. Justin Herbert, he was hot to start. And then they just kind of fell apart, and Auburn kind of got some momentum. Bo Nix is the real deal, I think. I think he's good despite not so great coaching on Auburn's part. But that was a huge, big-time throw to Seth Williams there at the end of the game. It seems like all these games it seems like SEC teams win games on vertical routes or seam routes or things like that. They don't, it's weird. Like it's just those big throws like that. Georgia lost a national championship on a big throw like that, and Auburn won their first game of the year this year on a throw like that. So I thought it was really dumb to snap the ball 7 yards deep to a quarterback on 4th and inches when all you have to do is take a snap and literally it requires the least athletic play of all time. You could
I want to talk about that a little bit more. I want to talk about that a little bit more because there's 5.5 minutes left in the game, and it's 4th and a foot, 6 inches maybe, for Oregon at the Auburn 40-ish. So they're not going to punt. They're going to go for it. But Hebert has been injured in the previous play. And if you're injured in the previous play, even with the timeout, you cannot re-enter the game. So they've got a backup quarterback in, and they're starting tailback CJ Verdell. And they've lined up in a pistol with the tailback 7 yards behind center. Now, I don't know about you, Coach, but I would go with the quarterback sneak here if I'm going to go for it, or because everyone in the building knows that they're going to hand it off to Verdell, so maybe go with a little play action, a little naked boot, something, anything but what they did, which is run stretch to the short side of the field.
Yeah, I'm not running a B gap boundary play out of pistol on 4th and inches. I'm either quarterback sneaking and falling forward and stumbling over my feet, or like you said, or like you and I talked about last night, I'm tossing it to my speed back and letting him race to the first down marker.
Yeah,
and
because
he probably would have gotten it.
Yeah, because let's face it, like the strength of Auburn's team, not just their defense, but their entire team, Josh, is their defensive line.
Mm-hmm.
So running it straight into the teeth of the defensive line doesn't seem like the best idea on one of the most important plays of the game.
Because even if you stretch it, you could at least just at any point just dive forward and you got a first down.
I know.
I think that these are plays that would have been better to run. The super safe quarterback sneak, like you've already talked about. Take advantage of the aggressive team. A very, very, very quick setting running back screen probably would have been busted. Maybe even, this is a little weird, and I know it wasn't with Hebert, so you're relying on a backup, but Matt, you mentioned a play action pass. And then if you want to get really funky, a little jump pass. And the way Auburn sold out for the run, there's a great chance that play is going for 7 and you win the game right there.
Yeah.
And, you know, you hear it all the time about playing not to lose, and that's what Oregon did. And if you want to just get a idea of what we're talking about, Google a little Fiesta Bowl between Oklahoma and Boise State. And Boise State, at no point in that game did Chris Peterson coach to not lose. He had the pedal to the metal, dialed up gutsy, tricky plays that took advantage of the superior athletic team, which was Oklahoma. They were so used to blowing stuff up that they would over pursue. They were, you know, ingrained of stopping the Hail Mary, so they hit them with a hook and lateral. They, on the play to win the game, did the Statue of Liberty to take advantage of Oklahoma's aggressiveness. Oregon knows that Auburn's going to be aggressive there. They know that Auburn's strength is their defensive line, and yet they ran right into the teeth of it in a day where they didn't really particularly run the ball all that impressive. So why? Doesn't make sense.
It makes no sense. And the fact that, you know, if you've got your backup quarterback in there and you know Herbert can't go in for that play, why not just pin him? Just pin them. They've scored what, 20? They'd scored 20 points to that point in the game.
Yeah. Well, it's worse than that too, because it took Oregon to figure whatever out. Really would have hurt themselves in any desperation 30-second drive if they had that much time. Obviously they didn't, but had they held Auburn to a field goal and had a desperation drive or whatever, the problem is they used a timeout to thinking they could get a Bear back in. Then they found out, oh wait, no, he can't go back in. Then they burned a second timeout.
Yeah, they used 2 of their 3 timeouts to no avail whatsoever.
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, it's just absolutely terrible. So as it comes out, you know, Auburn wins, good for the SEC, and that was about all the good news that the SEC got this weekend, because there were some losses this weekend that were inexplicable, to say the least. Obviously, Alabama slaughtered Duke. LSU beat the pants off of Georgia Southern. You know, Kentucky ended up beating Toledo. Wasn't the easiest game of the year, but they still ended up winning by double digits. Same thing goes for Mississippi State. But we have to talk about a couple of teams: South Carolina, Tennessee, and Mizzou. All of these teams lost to inferior opponents when they were double-digit favorites. Coach, I mean, which of these losses was the worst? Was it South Carolina losing to North Carolina in Charlotte? Was it Mizzou losing at Wyoming 37-31? Or perhaps the biggest upset of the week, Georgia State beating Tennessee 38-30 in Neyland Stadium?
Listen, you hear, and Matt, I'm sure you hear it too. I'm sure you're not deaf to this, but all the talk about what Tennessee's going to be and what they were just built to be this team. Like, they're back, they're going to be competitive, and not only to lose to a Group of 5 team. Okay, if that's not bad enough for what's considered to be a program with rich tradition and history. To lose to a team that finished 2-10 last year, a team that was probably a banana peel away from hiring me as head coach with no college pedigree, which I would go in a heartbeat to Georgia State to be the head coach. But
I mean, you'd be going home.
Yeah, Georgia State last year was awful. We talked about them in our preview as being one of the. I mean, they were mediocre at best in our Sun Belt preview.
I had them finishing 5th in their. I had them finishing like 5th in their division of the Sun Belt out of 5.
Yeah, I mean that's embarrassing, And not only did they come in and beat you, Tennessee had to put up a cosmetic touchdown at the end of the game to make themselves feel better. Jeremy Pruitt was comatose on the sideline because he was in such shock. Georgia State owned that game. And Jared Guarantano threw a couple of good touchdown passes. I'll give him a little bit of credit on that. But overall, they looked pitiful, uninterested, like they didn't want to be there. And they were awful. And they had no depth. And they just didn't want to be there. And they overlooked them. And they said, yeah, we'll just steamroll them. All we got to do is show up. Nope, you're wrong. At least South Carolina lost to a Power
5 team
that is in the first year. They're at least North Carolina is well coached because what we know about Mac Brown's pedigree and the staff.
Are they? Did you see what happened at the end of that game?
I was going to ask that same question. Hold on, one more thing before we hop over to South Carolina. My other friend, who's also named Josh, who happens to be a UT fan. I was texting with him on Saturday, mostly ridiculing him. And all he said back to me was, I'm not mad, we deserve it. And I feel like that's kind of the state of Tennessee football at this point. The fans aren't even mad. They know they deserve to be beat by Georgia State.
So let's get back to North Carolina.
Yeah, yes, let's talk North Carolina, South Carolina.
Listen, they've still got a little bit of fedora in them. Okay? Mac Brown is respected. So, of course, they're going to do some crazy stuff. But I think overall, if you look at the grand scheme of things, they're much better. They're a much better coach than they were a year ago. You can't deny that. But yes, at the end of that game, that was some stupid stuff going on. But I mean, come on, South Carolina, you got to be better than that. All things told. But thankfully Tennessee bailed you out. And then Missouri, I know you have all these distractions of being on academic suspension, but you got a shiny new tool in Kelly Bryant. You got doolied.
You got doolied. I mean, South Carolina let a true freshman in his first start for North Carolina, Sam Howell, go 15 of 24, 245 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. I mean, like, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? Jake Bentley, a third-year starter, looked off. Like, he looked like he was back in high school again. And Josh, like, I don't get it. I mean, we all said that the first fired in the SEC was going to be down at Auburn. But frankly, I mean, Muschamp's seat is hotter than anyone's right now.
Well, I mean, look, Muschamp is what a lot of coaches are, which is unbelievably stubborn. He wants to be a defensive first coach, and he doesn't give a rat's behind about offense. And so with his team up 20-9 entering that fourth quarter, Muschamp's going to Muschamp and take his foot off the pedal and not try and add any more points and just try and milk the clock and turn it into a hockey game. And against good teams, that's going to backfire. And against a team that just catches some fire, and let's be honest, that touchdown reception where the kid batted it like 20 times to himself, that was a lucky play. But Muschamp's system puts him in a vulnerable position for lucky plays. The game that I'm most curious about, though, Coach, I agree with you. Tennessee was the most embarrassing. South Carolina's was one of the more odd ones. But the Missouri-Wyoming game I found just fascinating. Normally when we see a big upset like this, it's some crazy moment where a quarterback goes off, like, hey, the Boise State game, which we'll talk about shortly. This was the opposite. Wyoming had a terrible day passing, but they had 297 rushing yards on a 7-yard per carry average. And the Pokes just hammered them. They had 2 kids. One was Sean Chambers, 120 yards and a touchdown. And then Xavion Valladay, 118 yards and a touchdown. They had this 2-headed monster that just ate an SEC defense alive. And what's crazy is this game was 14-0 after the first quarter, in favor of Missouri. So they outscored them 37-17 the rest of the way, including a monster second quarter that Wyoming put up 27 points in. It was one of the weirdest games of the weekend. I don't know what to make of Missouri now. Coach, you mentioned the distractions. That might be the case, but I'm actually going to look at the positives of this. And we love Craig Bowl. We didn't really know what Wyoming was going to have this year, and kind of a outside of Boise, a little bit more of an open Mountain West. I'm really intrigued about this Cowboys team the rest of the way.
Yeah, I really am. I was actually, just giving a short form of it because at some point you knew those distractions were going to come back and bite them in the ass a little bit, and Wyoming is going to be fun to watch because they're such a good running team. That's going to almost be culture shock within the Mountain West, to be honest with you, because a lot of the successful teams are like Boise that sling it around, but with the exception of San Diego State. But even they've kind of become irrelevant now since Rashad Penny's gone. But offensively they put up some numbers, but obviously they didn't get the stats where it counts.
Well, Josh, you just mentioned a Mountain West team, and you mentioned that, especially that Boise State team. Let's talk about them. They went into what was supposed to be Jacksonville, but ended up being Tallahassee, and beat Florida State 36-31 after getting out to a pretty slow start. Josh, a guy you mentioned earlier is Mr. Bachmeier, the true freshman quarterback, Hank Bachmeier. When I was listening to this game, I thought they were saying Brockmeier, Hank Brockmeier, the fictional character played by Hank Azaria in the IFC program. Brockmeier, very great television show if you haven't watched it yet. But Mr. Bachmeier, true freshman, 407 yards and a score through the air. Josh, I know you were impressed by them.
Yeah, so it didn't start great, let's be honest. 21-6 after the first quarter. Took Boise a little bit to get their sea legs underneath them, which is understandable since in the process of moving the game from Jacksonville to Tallahassee, they missed a day of practice. They also at some point had to fly across the country. So a little understandable that Boise had a bit of a slow start. Florida State took advantage of that. Boise could not tackle anything in that first quarter. Cam Akers ripped off a really long touchdown run there as a result. The running game was working pretty well in that first quarter. And then in the second quarter, Boise kind of figured some things out, got a few drives together. They ended in field goals, unfortunately. But they managed to crawl back and make it 31-19 at halftime, which felt a whole heck of a lot closer than the game should have been based on what Florida State did in that first half. The second half, all Boise State, 17-0. They shut out Florida State. They figured out how to get Bachmeier some more time. Their pass protection was never amazing, but they did some nice things as well as have Bachmeier move around the pocket to get at least clean looks to pass downfield, even though if it wasn't a traditionally clean pocket. Then they started to hammer Blackman and take advantage of Florida State's porous offensive line, which they have again. And Blackman ended up with 25 yards negative for his rushing, and a lot of that was obviously the sack yardage put in. Boise State was so impressive. That second half, they tackled just like a demo tape. It was crazy. They, everything that could have gone wrong tackling in that first quarter, they somehow figured it out on the fly. And that just speaks to phenomenal coaching. It speaks to the adjustments that they made at halftime. It speaks to how that locker room really plays for each other. There was no finger pointing. It speaks to if you take 1- and 2-star recruits and the occasional 3- and even 4-star recruit now and then, but you coach them up, you get everyone to buy in, and you play team football, which is the exact opposite of the sense that I have about Florida State, you can do amazing things. I said that if Boise State won this game, they had a really real possibility of going undefeated. Well, they won the game. They played their tails off. Bachmeier is amazing. A fan in Boise section is wearing a shirt that said Hank for Heisman. I'm not going to go that far for the true freshman, but the ceiling is really high on his career, and there is no reason this team can't be in one of the biggest bowls of the year come this winter. They're
Actually
amazing.
not. I mean, Bachmeier is one of the biggest recruits they've ever got to come up to Boise. I mean, he is a legit 4-star quarterback. He had offers from everyone coming out of high school, but he chose to go to Boise because he knew he could come in and play from day one. And that is what he's doing in replacing Brett Rippon. And he just had himself a day to get things started. Elsewhere in the ACC, we already talked about.
Hold on, back up a little bit. I want to talk about this. This is probably
Okay.
Besides Georgia Vandy that I watched the most closely this weekend. I'm gonna agree with just about everything Josh said. I want to make fun of myself for a little bit. I know you guys enjoy that. I sent a text out in the first half going, well, looks like Florida State is actually turning around, and I said that Willie Taggart probably threatened the team if they screwed it up that Alex Hornibrook was going to play, so they didn't want to screw it up, so they played hard, and then they fell apart. They came off at the seams. It was like a slow death, and you saw it just every single time. Cam Akers is extremely talented. I'll say that. I really am a big fan of Cam Akers, and I'm really a big fan of Marvin Wilson on the defensive line. He's wearing number 21, by the way, which is also impressive. But as a team, Florida State right now is horrendous. And you said it's a sad state of affairs in the city of Los Angeles. I think it's a equally sad state of affairs for the Power 5 programs in the state of Florida, namely the Big Three. Miami, Florida State are pitiful right now, and then Florida is trending that way, or at least they're not playing as well as people are making them. But Bachmeier was impressive. He hung in there. He took shots. There was one of his throws. It was for a first down. He stared down the barrel of the rush. I mean, he took a shot but delivered a dime to the sideline for I think it was just like a second and long play. Florida State dialed up some heavy pressure. They brought a brilliant blitz that it left two guys unblocked, and Bachmeier just got crushed and made the throw, got back up, and did it again. Didn't get crushed the second time, but he just kept going, and that's one thing that impressed me the most. The kid didn't bat an eyelash. He was playing, what usually is a hostile environment, Doak Campbell Stadium. That was also another thing. Boise State fans almost outnumbered the Florida State fans, and it was actually in Tallahassee. That's pretty telling. That's embarrassing if I'm Florida State, that your stadium was that empty. But Brian Harsin, man, great job on that. I'm starting to kind of become, I don't want to say a Boise fan, but I'm starting to kind of really admire the way they play because they do it year in and year out. They're scrappy, they're well coached, they're tough, they're mentally tough, physically tough. They have grit. They know how to win games like this, and they play the game the way it's supposed to be played.
I've been a Boise fan since Jared Zabransky. Welcome to the bandwagon. It's a fun place to be.
I remember when Zabransky came to Athens. I was still a student there. He came to Athens and got annihilated. That was my senior year at Georgia. Came in through like 5 picks, I think. Georgia won like 58-7 or something like that. Some lopsided win. Crazy.
At least the two teams scheduled that game.
Coach, that would have been September 3rd, 2005. Jared Zabransky went 8 for 17 for 70 yards and 4 picks. Good memory.
Yes.
Who was a quarterback for Georgia in that game?
It was DJ Shockley.
And he went 16 for 24 for 289 yards and 5 scores, added another score and 85 yards on the ground.
It was his first start.
Nice way to open things
Absolutely.
for Mr. Shockley, who had himself quite the senior year.
That was an SEC championship year. Would have had a chance to go undefeated had he not got hurt and missed the Florida game.
Alas. Well, one of the other games that we previewed last week in the ACC was the battle between Wake Forest and Utah State, and it lived up to the billing. Wake Forest ends up winning 38-35 on a touchdown with just over a minute left by the Demon Deacs. Josh, this was an awfully fun game to watch.
Yeah, it was. Wake has had some good offensive players go through there. They just had Dortch graduate last year. He was a good player. The coaching staff is offensive minded. So the nice thing about Wake Forest is they might not be able to win a conference title very often, but with this coaching staff, they're going to play an entertaining brand of football. And when we were previewing them, we talked about their pretty good backfield. They played as we expected. Jamie Newman, 400 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, no picks. His running back, Cade Carney, 100-yard day. With that tandem back there, Wake can make your Saturdays pretty miserable. Will that be enough to steal a big upset along the way, upset the apple cart in the ACC? Probably not, but they're kind of appointment TV because they are a fun team to watch.
Yeah, Sage Surratt at the wide receiver position is a lot of fun. He had 7 catches for 158 yards and a score here in the wind. Nonetheless, Jordan Love, the quarterback for Utah State, pretty much did a little bit of everything for them. He had 416 yards and 3 scores. Also, though, threw 3 picks, including the one that sealed the game for the Demon Deacs down in Wake Forest territory. That was not a good way to end the game, but Utah State has to at least be able to take something out of that one. Elsewhere in the ACC, we already talked about Boston College beating Virginia Tech 35-28. Over in that one, Anthony Brown looked absolutely fantastic for the Eagles. He had a clean day, 275 yards, 2 scores, no picks. A.J. Dillon didn't have his best game there, but still was able to find pay dirt. Virginia beat Pitt in what was not a very pretty game. And elsewhere in the conference, we know Duke got shellacked by Alabama. Clemson just bowled over Georgia Tech.
That's a tough opening game for Jeff Collins. That's just do I feel bad for him? No, because he's a Tech. But if he was anywhere else, I feel bad for him.
Yeah, and then Louisville last night got beat up by Notre Dame.
I want to talk a little bit more about that Louisville game, actually.
Okay, go for it.
Just for a hot minute. I watched it wire to wire, did some grading, and it was fun to have it on in the background. And Louisville, a little frisky. Their team that is going to be night and day better than last year. Is that mean that they can scratch out 6 wins along the way? I don't know. But they had a really nice day running the ball. Javian Hankins, 122 yards on 19 carries, along of 44. The quarterback, who had a very up-and-down debut season a year ago, Jawan Pass, showed some things, especially with his feet, 2 nice rushing touchdowns. I'm excited for Louisville because they didn't quit like they did a year ago. Their defense did pretty good considering they gave up 50 points like a million times a season ago and settled down after a 14-point first quarter. I think this Louisville team is buying what Scott Satterfield is selling. I think this is a team that can turn it around. And if not a bowl this year, I think they can make a bowl next year. And I think they can become a little frisky because they are extremely well coached. And I'm excited for Louisville.
Yes, Josh. And I will use Louisville to bolster my argument about North Carolina. You can tell by flashes in the game and glimpses in the game that they are well coached and they're buying what Mac Brown is saying and they're buying what Satterfield is saying, because they know Satterfield and Mac Brown, albeit we poke fun at the latter, they do have pedigrees, and Satterfield probably has one of the better pedigrees, albeit at App State. They still are extremely well respected, and he knows what he's doing. And so you can tell, and it didn't, 35-17 against Notre Dame didn't exactly tell the full story, but it was punch for punch early in the game. When I was watching it, and Jawan Pass, albeit his stats weren't that great, 12 of 27 for 134 yards, but I mean, he looked like a dangerous asset for Louisville, and they're going to be a team that's going to be not only pesky, but they're going to be a totally different team. So we're going to look at this game last night much differently. We're going to look at the Louisville Cardinals through a much different lens as we progress through the season. You're going to be like, wow, that was the team that lost 35-17 to Notre Dame. I don't believe it. They're the team in this conference I think is going to change the most. I think they have a really high ceiling with Satterfield. I don't think they're going to. I think they're going to be flirting with about 6 wins or so. I think that's kind of their ceiling this year. But there's going to be moments that say, okay, Louisville's going to stabilize.
Listen, if that team makes a bowl game, I will be. Scott Satterfield deserves to be freaking coach of the year.
Just to run through their schedule real quick: Eastern Kentucky and Western Kentucky. If they repeat the performance they had against Notre Dame, they should be able to win both those games. At Florida State, that is the least reliable team in the conference. I feel like that might be a fair assessment. So that one, who knows? Boston College, that's a tough game. At Wake Forest, interesting one. Maybe they can steal a game there. Clemson, don't worry about it. Virginia at home, I don't know. Virginia's favored to win the division, but they're not a world beater. At Miami, tough to know after that Florida game what exactly the Canes are. At NC State, tough to know. They played an FCS team. Syracuse, who shut out their opponent but didn't have the offensive day. So, what is Syracuse? I don't know. We'll find out. Too small a sample size. And then at Kentucky, who struggled. So they have some teams that didn't have amazing first impressions of the year. So who knows? Maybe Louisville can get those two in-state quote-unquote rivals, Eastern and Western, and then pick up a couple wins in conference. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, let's move on to another conference in the Big Ten. Josh, you're our Big Ten guy. We had a bunch of blowouts: Wisconsin, Ohio State, Penn State, Maryland, all wiped the floor with their opponents. Illinois, even. But we did have a couple of much tighter games than expected. Whether that was Minnesota squeaking by South Dakota State 28-21 on Thursday night. Purdue losing at Nevada, or even, Michigan getting off to a pretty slow start against MTSU, Northwestern losing to Stanford. We've talked about the struggles of Hunter Johnson already. Nebraska, needing the full 60 to beat South Alabama. What really stood out to you in the Big Ten this weekend?
Well, I talked about it in my quick slant, but Minnesota had kind of a no-win situation. They're playing that random Thursday night game, so they don't really get the full week of practice. They don't really get their full walkthrough. And they're playing an FCS team that is pretty good in the Missouri Valley Football Conference, and this is a marquee opportunity for them. So I'm not going to freak out and say Minnesota's going to regress after winning a bowl game after that game. Michigan State, like I said in my opening, that one was concerning. Wisconsin, it was impressive, but I think South Florida might be a festering pile of crap by the end of the year. Rutgers can't tell anything from Massachusetts. I'm sorry.
Hey, I gotta say this. You guys mocked me about South Alabama. I told you they were interesting. Did they not make this game? They at least made the first game of the year interesting. So that for that,
Well, I picked South Alabama to cover. Nebraska's got some red flags about them.
I was talking about the season preview.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Now they might go like 1-11, but I thought
They can still be interesting at 1-11.
Yeah.
They could still be very interesting. They could be a really scrappy 1-11.
But yeah, I mean, Nebraska, they're not a complete team right now. When their offense plays to expectations, do they have enough defense? I don't know. Did their defense look good against South Alabama? Sure, but it's South Alabama. I'm not buying Nebraska yet. I've talked about how O'Leary left the cabinet pretty full at Central Florida. Scott Frost is having to do a page one rewrite with Nebraska, so I'm holding my breath. But the things that I didn't talk about in my opening, Purdue, absolutely terrible loss. Just ridiculous. They're outscored 17-0 in the fourth quarter. They lose 34-31 on a 56-yard field goal. Their running game wasn't particularly good. Elijah Sindelar, veteran quarterback, 2 interceptions. Not very good control there. Their absolutely amazing player that we all love, Rondell Moore, couldn't buy a touch in the second half. Because of that, tries to make a hero play on a punt. You know what that's going to lead to. He muffed it. And just Purdue didn't look well coached. And that's a concern because this is a guy that we're all really high on. This is Brom and his brother. This is the Brom Bros supposed to get Purdue over the hump. And the product this far into their tenure left a lot to be desired. And then the last one, try to not be a homer, but Iowa, terrible first half. Awful offensively in the first half. Some just rookie mistakes by a veteran quarterback in Nathan Stanley. Like on 2 plays in a row, his running back came out of the backfield and Miami didn't have a single guy cover him. And all he needed to do was flip a little 2-yard pass that the run after catch would have been a 30-yard play. And instead he chucks it deep down the field at his first target, who he never looked off of. And it's just like, what are you doing? I'm hoping that it was just a little bit of rust because the offense looked a whole heck of a lot better in the second half. And the best news of all, their preseason All-American, one of their 2 preseason All-Americans on that offensive line, Alaric Jackson, had a freshman guard on the other side of the line block his man so ridiculously well, he walked him all the way across the line to the Alaric Jackson. And then when the Miami guy dropped like a sack of potatoes, rolled up on Alaric Jackson's knee, which is terrifying when you're watching the offensive line. Thankfully, no surgery required. It sounds like he could be back in as short a time period as 2 weeks.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be 2 weeks. I want to talk quickly about the Northwestern Stanford game. I mean, it was about as
unwatchable.
It was unwatchable. It was a rock fight between two quadriplegics. I mean, it was god awful. I just wanted to mention that so we don't have to talk about it in the Pac-12 segment of our show.
Well, it didn't help that both quarterbacks got knocked out, and it didn't help that one of the most egregious targeting calls they didn't bother to review.
Yeah. Wisconsin, Josh, you talked about them. They rolled South Florida. The only thing to take away from this game is, Wisconsin's defense threw a shutout. South Florida didn't cross midfield until about 4 minutes left in the game. And Jonathan Taylor, 2 receiving touchdowns. Watch out. Watch out. Let's move on to the Big 12. Josh, you already mentioned Oklahoma State in your answer during the pop quiz.
Actually, Coach did. That was Coach, not me.
That was a coach mentioning. Yeah. I am sorry. Elsewhere in the Big 12, there were not a lot of very notable games except for Houston giving up. Oklahoma just scored again against Houston, I think. But Kansas State, TCU, Baylor, Texas Tech, Kansas, Iowa State all played FCS teams. Iowa State, though, needed triple overtime to beat Northern Iowa. Josh, that's your home state. Yeah. What in the Sam hell is going on in Ames?
Nothing to be alarmed about just quite yet. Northern Iowa won the turnover margin. That can sometimes help. They got a fantastic day by a quarterback, and I mentioned that earlier in the show that sometimes when there's these weird close calls or even upsets, a quarterback goes off. Well, Will McLeaven from Northern Iowa, I hope I'm saying that right, he had himself a day, 25 of 42, 228 yards, and a touchdown, and that overtime play he made was just absolutely spectacular. It felt like he ran about 60 yards to throw back across the field for a touchdown. Some context of this game and this Northern Iowa program in general, they're a little overshadowed in the Missouri Valley Football Conference because there's freaking North Dakota State in it, but they are a reliable playoff appearance team. They're really well coached. They were expected to finish like 3rd to 5th, depending on the publication that checks out the Missouri Valley Football Conference. So they're a way above average FCS team. And on top of that, barring making the title game or a deep run in the playoffs, getting either Iowa or Iowa State is their Super Bowl. And they've picked off Iowa State before. They've almost picked off Iowa before. And before everyone goes, well, Iowa State's screwed because they had a close game, I like to remind people that a few years ago when Iowa made it to the Orange Bowl and had their first major bowl victory since the Rose Bowl in the 50s, their opening day game was against Northern Iowa. And Iowa was super lethargic, looked like it was their debut game, maybe a little uninterested, probably looking a little bit past Northern Iowa, and Northern Iowa came to ball. And it was a back and forth affair. Northern Iowa had a chance to win. They set up for a pretty manageable, about maybe 35 to 40 yard field goal as the time was winding down. It was 3rd down with about 10 seconds left. Speaks to being well coached. They say, hey, let's kick it on this down in case there's a bad snap, something goes wrong. We just eat it, attempted on 4th down. Iowa blocks the kick. The block went backwards, which meant it was essentially the same as a fumble. Iowa's celebrating, thinking they just won the game, and a Northern Iowa player astutely jumps on the ball. Refs talk about it and go, well, they attempted the kick on 3rd down. The block went backwards. That's the same as a fumble. So, yeah, UNI retains possession. So they take their timeout and line up for a field goal on 4th down. And by some crazy divine providence, I don't know why, I'm not a believing person, Iowa blocked 2 field goals in a row. And the second one, you could bet their entire team jumped on the ball, even though it was 4th down and the block went forward past the line of scrimmage. But the long story short is Iowa had one of their most memorable seasons, and yet their debut game against Northern Iowa looked like shaky as all get out. So I'm not going to write off Iowa State. Brock Purdy had a pretty good game, all things considered. I just think this speaks to UNI. Sad to say, because we know that Iowa State has a good team and Campbell's a good coach, but UNI just wanted this game more, and it showed.
Josh, was that the season that you just mentioned where Iowa finished with the immortal Ricky Stanzi words of America, love it or leave it?
Yes, it is. It's also the season that they lost to Ohio State in overtime because Ricky Stanzi got hurt against Northwestern, unfortunately. But yeah, that was one hell of a season.
That was. Well, let's head quickly then over to the Pac-12. Not a whole lot else to talk about here in the Big 12. In the Pac-12 over the weekend, I already talked about the two teams from Los Angeles. We already talked about Hawaii beating Arizona back in week 0. Biggest game, I would say, is the Holy War, which was Thursday night, Utah BYU. Utah comes away looking pretty good, winning 30-12. BYU could not move the ball at all. Elsewhere, Arizona State wins 30-7 in the debut of Jalen Daniels, their 5-star quarterback recruit. He looked really strong. Colorado wins the battle over Colorado State.
Fighting Bobos, I don't see it lasting too much longer.
Yeah, it's not
Bobo's lost the fight himself. I mean, my God, he is. You want to talk about a guy that's burnt out physically? He's got to step aside and take some time for himself, or he's gonna die on the sideline. Real talk. I mean, it's getting bad.
He looks worse than Hugh Freeze in the hospital bed in the Syracuse booth.
God.
I mean, it is not pretty up there. It is not pretty over there. But let's go back to the Holy War. I think this was the game of the week in the Pac-12. Utah, though, just, their preseason, top 25 team. And, obviously their offense really didn't get a whole lot clicking, only 368 total yards. But, man, Zach Moss on the ground, 187 yards and a score. He looks like he's in midseason form. The senior tailback for the Utes just absolutely churning up the yards against BYU, who could get nothing done on offense. Coach, is this the beginning of the end for Kalani Sitake up at BYU?
I don't know. I mean, Utah's such a good team this year. I don't know. I mean, you think so because they became so inept in this game, but they had an initial surge at the beginning of the game. And watching this, I noticed that Utah did a great job of weathering that storm and just played through it, and then eventually Zach Moss got going, and they did what Utah does. But BYU just looked at times really good and at times really incompetent. And so that kind of variety in ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys, as you will, they need to become more steady if they want to take off under, under what Tataki?
Mr. Mushrooms.
Yeah.
Kalani Shiitake mushrooms.
Shiitake mushrooms, yes. I really, I thought they had something good with Tyjon Williams, but he only had 7 carries for 45 yards. I mean, they completely abandoned the run at some point. I mean, he was running well early on, and then honestly, this game late put me to sleep. Honestly, that's how bad BYU became within this game. So I don't know. Time will tell, because sometimes they're good enough to take down teams like Wisconsin, and sometimes they just look completely inept and blow any momentum they had at the beginning of a game, like they did on Thursday against Utah.
Yeah, it was, it's tough for BYU, but Utah, man, I mean, their schedule sets up pretty well. They've got Northern Illinois next week, which will be an interesting game between two of the stronger teams in the group of 5. But, they'll be playing at USC on September 20th.
That's a win.
And I mean, with the state of USC, that's a win. They get Washington State at home.
That's a blowout loss.
They've got one really tough game this year. That's at Washington the first weekend in November. Aside from that, every game for them is winnable. Every game for them is winnable. And it would not surprise me at all if, we're coming around in late October. We're saying, Utah, they're 8-0 and they're a top 8 team in the country. Where did that come from? Well, it came from Kyle Whittingham and that defense, because it's not going to come from Andy Ludwig's offense. Let's face it. I mean, I was sitting at the Vanderbilt game.
Well. Let me
hold on, Josh. I was sitting at the Vanderbilt game on Saturday, and the guy in front of me, who is 20-year Vanderbilt season ticket holder, said he has never been so happy as when they got rid of Andy Ludwig. And I said, wow, that is a sad state of Vanderbilt football, but I completely understand it as a Wisconsin alum.
Well, I want to give my 2 cents on this game. First of all, I'm going to praise Kyle Whittingham and, by extension, Andy Ludwig a little bit. In the exact opposite of what Oregon did, which was keep trying to run when it really wasn't working and not let their Heisman Trophy candidate pass it a lot more. Utah at some point just realized, yeah, we can run it down BYU's throat and they can't stop it. And so Huntley only needed 16 pass attempts and he completed 13 of them. When Zach Moss is running for $187, keep giving it to him. And so he had 29 carries. That's smart play calling. For BYU, to answer your question, Matt, I think we need to give them another week or two. Zach Wilson had some flashes, but he had 2 picks. And as a team, 3 turnovers to none. Tough to really beat anybody losing the turnover margin 3-0. So I'm willing to give BYU several more weeks for me to have a nice sample size. I thought they were a couple bounces away last year from having a lot more wins than they actually did. They traveled to reeling Tennessee next, pick up a win at Neyland. You know, all is right in the world. So I'm going to give the Cougs a little bit of a chance.
All right. Well, that makes one of us.
That makes 2 of us. They're not dead yet.
Okay, they're not dead yet. You're right. They're not dead yet, but they're not quite in hospice care, but I think they're approaching it.
Oh, God.
I think they're approaching it. So, gents, unless you guys have anything else to add, I think that is pretty much going to do it for us this evening.
Well,
we're not going to discuss and break down every Division II football game.
I mean, we could go through the full NAIA schedule if you really wanted to.
We're not going to talk about the group of 5.
I mean, we could. Is there anything? Let's talk group of 5, Josh. What stood out to you?
Well, there's a brand new segment I wanted to debut for this show.
Okay, hit it. What you got for us?
Each year, it's going to be Josh adopts a random team, and it's going to have a little jingle just like that. And the team that I'm formally adopting,
Matt, isolate that, please.
That's a random.
Oh, you know I'm going to.
The random team that I'm adopting this year, I've talked about them before. They're kind of the lovable losers. They got to a bowl game a couple years ago. They've had some weird mixed results. They had an Iowa grad transfer on their roster at quarterback last year. Talking about, of course, Ypsilanti's heart and soul, the Eastern Michigan Fighting Screaming Eagles. They took on Coastal Carolina and won that game 30-23. So one step closer to a bowl. Pretty nice day by their quarterback, Mike Glass III. Had 20 of 22 completion attempts for $188, 3 touchdowns, no picks. That is quite a day right there. I am thrilled for Eastern, and they have an interesting game next at Kentucky, who you guys talked about it, had a little bit of a slow start, to say the least, against a fellow MAC team. I'm not expecting them to win, but they're my lovable team that I adopted, so I'm certainly rooting for the Screaming Eagles next week.
All right. I thought you were going to be going for the North Texas Mean Green, Mason Fine.
No, they're too good. The team that I need to adopt is like a borderline bowl team. It can't be a team favored to win their conference.
Okay. Well, so you're not going with, I don't know, Old Dominion?
No.
Okay. I thought the other team you might be Tulane. I
think Tulane's going to be too good. I think they have a puncher's chance of making it to the AAC title game.
Okay, that works for me.
Yeah. Plus, the nice thing with Eastern Michigan is I get to say words like Ypsilanti. I get to add a really long nickname to them, which is now the Mean Screaming Eagles. So, yeah, why not?
Why not? That's as good. As good a reason as any I've heard.
It's like all of our other dumb segments. Why not?
Why not is correct. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it. Did we miss anything?
Oh, crap. Yeah.
What happened, Josh?
We buried a lead.
Seriously? Again?
We did.
You think we?
How does this keep happening?
I really don't know, but Arkansas boys put together a gem and a half against Portland State. You want defensive numbers? I got some defensive numbers. Portland State held to 16 first downs, 2 of 13 on third. Don't pay attention to the 3 of 3 on fourth down. Held them to 230 yards, just 155 passing with 3 interceptions, 75 rushing yards, won the turnover margin 3-0. They forced Portland State into a ridiculous 10 penalties for 85 yards and just 26 minutes time of possession, as you can expect with a defensive performance like that. Wu Pig Sui rolled to an easy victory, just dominated them 20-13. Nothing to see here, folks. Arkansas is on fire. Don't sleep on Mr. Rakeem Boyd. He had himself a 114-yard day, rushing the ball and a touchdown, so he was the bright spot on a game that was offensively putrid.
The word I was looking for was unwatchable. All right. Well, I think that is going to do it for us here on the Illegal Motion College Football Podcast in our Week 1 recap. So, on behalf of our own offensive coordinator, the coach, Corey Burton, here in the Music City, and our intrepid blogger from Big Ten and Counting, Josh Cook, up there in the Windy City, this is the professor in Nashville saying so long and see you next time on the Illegal Motion College Football Podcast.
Go Rams. Yeah, that's right. The Victor Valley Community College Rams. Yeah.